The wine hit her dress before she could even process what had happened. She looked down at the dark red stains spreading across the ivory fabric, then slowly looked up. The woman standing in front of her, sharp features, designer everything, a smile that had nothing warm in it, tilted her head. "Oops. Didn't see you there." Then she smiled. Wide. Satisfied. Anita Omazi looked at her for exactly 2 seconds. Then she reached out, picked up the fresh glass of wine from the tray of a passing waiter, and tipped it slow and deliberate straight down the woman's front. The woman gasped. The people nearest to them went still. Anita leaned in just slightly. Her voice was calm, almost gentle. "Don't ever mistake my silence for weakness. I am not one of the people you get to humiliate. Not tonight. Not any night." The woman's composure cracked immediately. Her face twisted and she stepped forward, voice rising. "Wipe it off now," the woman said. Or what?" The voice came from across the room. Low. Controlled. And it cut through every other sound in that space like a blade through paper. He was already walking toward them. His eyes weren't on Anita. They were fixed entirely on the woman in front of her. "Soo-yeon." He said the name like a warning. "What did you do?" Soo-yeon's whole body shifted immediately. The arrogance drained out of her face and something else replaced it, something rehearsed. Her eyes went wide and she pointed at Anita. "She threw her wine on me first, Appa. I didn't do anything. I was just standing here and she just..." "Stop talking." He wasn't even looking at his sister anymore. He was looking at Anita. Reading her face. Reading the scene. Reading everything his sister hadn't said. Anita stood completely still, arms loose at her sides, watching him. She wanted to see what kind of man he was. Whether he would choose comfort over truth. Whether he would look the other way because it was easier. He turned back to Soo-yeon. And then he slapped her. Not a tap. Not a gesture. A full, sharp, deliberate slap that rang out and made 3 people nearby flinch. The room went absolutely silent. If a man defended you like this in front of everybody, would you ever forget him? Like this video, and if you're new to this channel, subscribe and stay with me because this story is only going to get better from here. Anita Omazi had built her life with her own 2 hands, and she had never once apologized for it. She was 27, a practicing physician specializing in internal medicine, and she carried herself with the kind of quiet authority that came not from ego, but from knowing exactly who she was. She wasn't looking for love the night she walked into that gathering. Her friend and former patient, David, had been asking her for 3 weeks straight to come to his private dinner event, and she had run out of excuses. She arrived in a red dress, heels she rarely wore, and a plan to stay for exactly 1 hour. She was standing near the far end of the room, champagne in hand, watching the crowd the way a doctor watches a waiting room, cataloging, assessing, already preparing to leave, when someone appeared beside her. "Don't tell me you're bored too." She turned. He was tall, broad-shouldered, dressed simply for a room that was trying very hard. He wasn't performing anything. That was the first thing she noticed. "Do you read minds?" she said. "No. But you've checked your watch 4 times in the last 10 minutes. She almost smiled. "I came with a friend. I don't know many people here." She sipped her champagne. "I'm leaving soon." "That's unfortunate," he said. "The night just got interesting." She looked at him properly. He held her gaze without flinching and without trying too hard. That combination was rarer than people thought. They talked. Not long, but enough. She told him she was a doctor. He told her his name was Kongmin. She told him hers. They were mid-sentence when David materialized beside them with the energy of a man who had been looking for both of them. "There you are, both of you, at the same time. I'm not even surprised." He grinned. "Anita, this is my guy, Kongmin." "Kongmin, Anita is the doctor I told you about, the one who basically saved my life last year." Kongmin looked at her with something new in his expression. "That was you." "That was me," she said. Before the evening ended, they had exchanged numbers. It felt like the natural thing to do. Not charged. Not a big moment. Just easy. Kang In-yu was not a man who explained himself, and he had long since stopped feeling the need to. At 31, he ran a business empire that operated in spaces most people didn't ask questions about, and the people who worked under him understood that his word was final and his patience was not unlimited. He was respected by the people who mattered and feared by the people who needed to be. He had never mixed those two things up. 6 months earlier, he had ended his engagement to Han quietly and without public explanation. Han was beautiful, socially polished, and had come from the kind of family that made the union look ideal on paper. His sister Soo-yeon had adored her. His grandmother had accepted her warmly. His older brother Jun had shaken his hand and told him he'd chosen well. What none of them knew was what Kang In had found on a Tuesday evening when he came home early from a trip. What they didn't know was that it wasn't the first time. What they didn't know was that he had stood in that hallway for a long moment, felt something go cold and permanent inside him, and then simply walked back out and began the quiet process of dismantling a future he had believed in. He told no one why. He just ended it. Han, drowning in shame, couldn't bring herself to tell his family the truth either. So she did the next best thing. She begged. Through Soo-yeon mostly. Calling her, crying, telling her she'd made a terrible mistake, that she loved him, that she would do anything. Soo-yeon, who didn't know what she was actually defending, pushed back at her brother every chance she got. You just ended it, no explanation. You owe her at least a conversation. I don't owe her anything. Drop it, Soo-yeon. But Appa. I said drop it. He never raised his voice. That was always how she knew he was done talking. He had gone to the hospital 3 weeks after the dinner event to visit his grandmother, who had been admitted for a routine procedure. He stayed with her for an hour, held her hand while she complained about the food, promised to bring her the soup she liked, and then kissed her forehead and stood to leave. He was walking down the corridor when he saw her. White coat, clipboard tucked under her arm, moving like she owned the hallway in the quietest possible way. She saw him at the same moment. They both stopped. You never called, Anita said. He almost smiled. I lost your contact. Couldn't ask David without turning it into a whole conversation. She wasn't letting him off. But she wasn't cold either. She was just watching him be honest and deciding what to do with it. Let me make it up to you, he said. Coffee. She held his gaze for 1 second. Maybe 2. I finish at 4. He nodded. She pulled out her phone, opened his contact, which she had kept, and this time watched him save her number correctly. He called before he even reached the hospital exit. Got her voicemail. Left a short message. Called again that evening and told her he'd come and pick her up on Saturday. I'll drive myself, she said. I know. I'll still come. Come in. I said I'll drive. A pause. A brief, amused exhale on his end. Fine. She drove herself. He was waiting outside the cafe when she arrived. It was a small place. Quiet. Not the kind of venue his world usually called for, which was part of why she relaxed the moment they walked in. They sat across from each other with their coffees, and they talked the way two people talk when they've both spent too long being careful with the wrong people. She asked about his work without pressing for details he wasn't offering. He asked about hers and actually listened when she answered. They talked about family. About what they wanted. About what they'd walked away from. He told her about Han. Not all of it, but enough. I caught her. And when I looked into it, I found out it wasn't the first time. Anita was quiet for a moment. She wrapped both hands around her mug. I'm sorry. Don't be. I'd rather know. She nodded slowly. Then she told him her own. A relationship she had poured 3 years into. A man who had taken her steadiness for granted so completely that he hadn't even tried to hide it in the end. I keep asking myself, she said, setting her cup down, why we choose to love people who choose to hurt us. Like, what is it in us that keeps picking that? He looked at her for a long moment. Maybe we've just been choosing the wrong people. She held his gaze. Something in the air between them shifted almost imperceptibly. She picked her cup back up and didn't answer, but she didn't look away either. More dates followed. A walk through a market on a Sunday morning where she made fun of his negotiating and he pretended to be offended. A rooftop dinner where she fell asleep on the drive home and he didn't wake her until they were at her building. A rainy evening where they stayed in his car for 40 minutes talking about nothing and everything because neither of them wanted to say goodnight yet. He invited her to meet his family on a Thursday evening. She said yes the same way she said yes to most things that mattered, without making a performance of it. The house was large and warm and smelled like food someone had been cooking for hours. His grandmother was the first person they encountered, and the old woman stopped mid-sentence when she saw Anita. "It's you." Her eyes went soft. "You were my doctor. I remember your hands. They were always so gentle." She reached out and held Anita's face for a moment. "Come in. Come in, come in." His younger brother June was in the sitting room and stood when they walked in. He shook Anita's hand and looked at her with open curiosity that had nothing threatening in it. "So you're actually a doctor? What kind?" "Internal medicine." "Serious work." He nodded, impressed. "Do you enjoy it?" "Every day." They fell into easy conversation. June asked follow-up questions. Anita answered them. Common watched from slightly apart with an expression that was almost relaxed. Soo-yeon was in the room. Present. Seated. She had said hello with a smile that didn't quite reach anything real, and then gone quiet in the particular way of someone who is choosing their moment. It came during dinner. A comment about how surprising it was that Anita had found the house so easily, delivered with just enough sweetness to be insulting. A suggestion, wrapped in a question, about whether Anita attended events like this often. Anita set her fork down. Very calmly. "Soo-yeon." She said the name the way you set something fragile on a hard surface. "I'm going to be generous and assume you're not trying to be as rude as you're coming across. But if you are, I'd encourage you to reconsider. I don't get embarrassed easily, but I don't let things go either. Enjoy your food." June put his hand over his mouth. His shoulders were shaking. Finally, he managed. "Somebody." Finally. Soo-yeon sat in her humiliation with nowhere to put it and said nothing for the rest of dinner. When Anita left that night, Soo-yeon turned on her brother the moment the door closed. "Who is she? Why would you bring her here?" "She's someone Ha-eun could never measure up to." Soo-yeon stared at him. "You ended your engagement, no explanation to anyone, and now you're bringing a stranger into this house like." "I'm done with this conversation. Why did you break up with Ha-eun? Just tell me that one thing, Appa. What could she possibly have done?" "Soo-yeon." He looked at her steadily. "Let me be." He walked away. She stood there with her frustration and nowhere to direct it. She called Ha-eun that night. The line was quiet for a moment after she told her. Then Ha-eun's voice came through, stripped of its usual composure. "She can't have him. I'm not going to allow that. They planned it together." Soo-yeon knew Anita's hospital and her schedule. She had paid attention over dinner. They waited for her outside on a Wednesday evening as she was walking to her car. Ha-eun stepped out first. "Stay away from him." Anita stopped walking. She looked at Ha-eun. Then Soo-yeon, who stood a few feet behind her. Then back at Ha-eun. "From who exactly? Don't play dumb with me. I'm genuinely asking. Which man are you referring to? Because the man I know ended your engagement and moved on." "That man? That's the one you're standing outside my hospital for." Ha-eun's jaw tightened. "You don't know anything about what we had." "I know what he told me. And I know what you did. So stand there and tell me he's your man." "Go on." Ha-eun lunged. Soo-yeon was right behind her. What they hadn't counted on, what nobody had warned them, was the black belt Anita had held for 6 years. The result was not a long fight. It was a brief, efficient, and deeply embarrassing conclusion that left both of them on the ground catching their breath while Anita straightened her coat, picked up her bag, and walked to her car. She didn't tell Kong-in. She had handled it. It was done. She saw no reason to hand him a problem she'd already solved. When Soo-yeon came home that night with a bruised cheek and a story about falling, Kong-in looked at her for a long moment from across the room. "Falling," he repeated. "Yes." He looked at her 1 second longer, then walked away. He visited Anita at the hospital the next day during her lunch break. He brought food from the place near her apartment that she had mentioned once in passing. She looked at the bag when he set it down and then looked at him. You remembered. I remember everything you say. They ate together in the break room, and it felt like the most natural thing in the world, which was the part that kept catching her off guard. How easy it was. How much of herself she didn't have to put away to be around him. He told her about an upcoming event. Formal. A major function in his world, the kind where his presence would be noted and who he arrived with would be noticed. I want you there with me. She looked up from her food. As what? He held her gaze. As mine. The word landed somewhere in her chest and stayed there. She didn't rush her answer. She just looked at him for a moment and then nodded. He kissed her before he left. Soft and unhurried, his hand against her jaw. She stood in the break room doorway for a few seconds after he'd gone down the corridor, and she allowed herself the quiet indulgence of smiling where nobody could see it. The night of the event, he arrived at her apartment with a single flower. She opened the door, and he went still for just a moment, taking in the way she looked, and she watched him do it without saying anything. He held her hand the entire walk to the car. They arrived and walked in together, and Anita felt the subtle shift in the room, the glances, the recalibration, the quiet assessment of who she was and why she was on his arm. Kongmin put his mouth close to her ear. You're the most interesting person in this room. You haven't spoken to anyone else yet. I don't need to. He pecked her cheek and went to greet people, looking back at her once from across the room. She watched him go and then turned and accepted a glass of wine from a passing tray and let herself exist in the evening. Someone recognized her from the hospital. They were mid-conversation when she felt the shift in the air beside her. Soo-yeon. The rest had already been told. The wine. The response. The warning. The entrance. The silence. The slap that rang out and made the room hold its breath. And then they were in the aftermath of it. Kongmin turned to Anita. His voice had dropped to something quieter but no less controlled. I'm sorry you experienced that. Then he looked at his sister and let the silence say the first part of what he was feeling. Anita looked at Soo-yeon. Then at Kongmin. It seems she needs another dose of what I gave her the last time. Kongmin's eyes came back to her. What does that mean? Not here. He turned to Soo-yeon. We'll finish this at home. In the car, driving back through the city, he was quiet for several minutes. The kind of quiet that wasn't peace, it was restraint. When he finally spoke, his voice was level. What did you mean? The last time. Anita looked out of the window for a moment. Then she told him. All of it. The hospital car park. Haeun and Soo-yeon waiting for her. What they said. What she did. He pulled the car over to the side of the road. Engines still running. He sat there for a moment with his hands on the wheel. Why didn't you tell me? I handled it. Anita. I didn't want to burden you with something I'd already resolved. It was done. It wasn't done. His voice was still quiet, but there was something underneath it now. They put their hands on you. And they regretted it immediately. He exhaled. Looked at her. She could see him wrestling with something, the part of him that wanted to make this a much bigger moment pressing against the part of him that recognized she was not a woman who needed rescuing. She had handled it. That was the truth. I'm revisiting this, he said. Leave it. No. He took her to her apartment. Walked her inside. At the door he held her face in both hands and looked at her for a moment like he was checking that she was real and present and unhurt. I love you. She looked at him. The words had been between them for a while, living in the spaces of all those evenings, all those drives, all those meals, but this was the first time either of them had said it out loud, and it arrived without warning, and it was exactly right. I love you too, she said. He kissed her. Said goodnight. Left. He drove home with the kind of cold clarity that only settled over him when he had already made a decision and was simply moving toward it. Soo-yeon was already home. She was sitting in the living room when he walked in, and she looked up with something cautious in her eyes. He stood in front of her. The event tonight. The car park outside her hospital. Both of them. I want to hear you explain it. Appa, I was just. Don't. His voice didn't rise. It never rose. Don't manage me. Just tell me. Soo-yeon's composure shifted. The defensiveness came next. You just brought a woman into our home out of nowhere. You ended your engagement without a single word of explanation to any of us, and we're all supposed to just. You want to know why I ended it? She stopped. You've been asking me for 6 months. You really want to know? Something in his tone made her go still. I came home from my trip early, he said. I found Han in my house. With someone else. And when I started looking back, I realized it hadn't been the first time. Not even close. The room was silent. Soo-yeon's face went through several things in quick succession. Shock. Disbelief. A dawning, heavy shame. That is the woman you've been going to bat for. That is the woman you stood outside a hospital car park to defend. That is who you brought Han back to me for. I didn't know, Soo-yeon's voice came out small. You didn't need to know. That's the point. I didn't owe you an explanation. I am your brother, and my choices deserve your respect regardless of whether you understand them. He let that sit for a moment. But what you will not do, ever, is take your frustration with me out on a woman who has done nothing to you. You don't know Anita. You've spent every moment in her presence trying to make her feel unwelcome, and she has done nothing except exist in my life. He paused. Mom and Dad did not raise us like this. I know they didn't. Soo-yeon's eyes were wet. You will apologize to her. Not because I'm telling you to, because it's the right thing and somewhere in you, you know it. He moved toward the hallway. Your share from the family arrangement is suspended. Until I see you conduct yourself like someone who was raised properly. Good night. He went to Han the following morning. He didn't give her time to build her opening, just stood in her doorway, and let her see from his face that this was not a conversation that would go anywhere she wanted it to go. I know what happened outside the hospital. I know about all of it. His voice was quiet and absolute. Stay away from her. Stay away from my family. Stay away from me. Whatever you've been telling yourself about what still exists between us, it doesn't. It ended the day I walked back out of my own home. You understand me? Han said nothing. There was nothing to say. 3 days later, Soo-yeon showed up at the hospital alone. Anita saw her in the corridor and slowed. She waited. Soo-yeon stood in front of her without the armor she usually wore. No performance. No angle. Just a woman standing in the quiet mess of her own actions. I owe you an apology. A real one. She paused, steadying herself. I resented you because I didn't understand why my brother ended things with Han, and I was angry at him, and I put that on you. And I didn't even know you. You walked into our home, and I had already decided to dislike you for something that had nothing to do with you. Her voice was even but strained. And then what I did with Han, I'm not going to dress it up. It was wrong. It was cowardly. And you didn't deserve any of it. Anita looked at her for a long moment. You're right that you had no reason to resent me. I walked in there and treated your family with respect, and you treated me like a problem to solve. She said it clearly, without cruelty. But you came here yourself, without your brother telling you to stand in front of me. That matters. A pause. I forgive you, Soo-yeon. Don't waste it. Soo-yeon exhaled like she'd been holding it for days. They held each other briefly, tentative but genuine. As Soo-yeon turned to leave, her phone lit up. Han's name across the screen. She looked at it. Then at Anita. Then back at the phone. She declined the call. Opened her contacts. Blocked the number. Right there in the corridor. Anita watched her do it and said nothing. But something settled. The family dinner happened on a Saturday. Kangmin's grandmother was at the head of the table, conducting the meal like an orchestra. June was beside Anita asking her questions about her work that turned into a genuine conversation about healthcare systems that Kangmin watched with quiet amusement. Soo-yeon was there, quieter than usual, but present, and making an effort that everyone could see. David came as Kangmin's guest and spent most of dinner making the grandmother laugh. The food was good. The warmth in the room was real. Anita was reaching for her glass when she noticed Kangmin had gone quiet beside her. She turned to look at him. He was already looking at her. Then he reached into the inside pocket of his jacket, and she felt the entire room shift. He didn't make a speech. He wasn't that kind of man. He just opened the box, looked at her, and said the things he meant. That she had walked into his life and made everything in it make more sense. That she was the kind of woman he hadn't known to look for. That he was asking her, not telling her, asking her, to let him spend the rest of his life being worth what she brought to the table. The room was absolutely silent. Anita looked at him. At the box. At him again. Yes, she said. And then, quieter, just for him. Obviously yes. He laughed, a real one, rare and open. And put the ring on her finger and stood and kissed her, and the table erupted around them, and the grandmother was saying something in Korean that David was trying to translate, and June was already on his feet, and even Soo-yeon was laughing through her tears. Anita held Kangmin's face for a moment in the noise of all of it, and she looked at him and thought about the dinner party where she had checked her watch 4 times. About the hospital corridor. About the coffee shop. About all the quiet evenings that had added up to this one loud, beautiful, overwhelming moment. Some things, she thought, were worth every difficult step it took to reach them. If this story moved you, subscribe and share it with someone who needed to see it today. If someone humiliated you publicly like this, would you stay calm like Anita or react immediately? And do you think Kangmin did the right thing by slapping his sister, or did he go too far? Leave a comment. See you in the next one.